Hello, all praise to Jesus Christ, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So, continuing on the series of videos about Mystery Babylon and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on here and understand the false religions and how that relates to the Bible and that type of thing. And we're going to go a bit into, or a bit of Apollyon today, and a bit of oracles and a few things going into some more connections. So this is probably the third or fourth video in this series. This is not a good place to start. And as I've said before in other videos, if you aren't confident in your salvation, if you don't know the basics well, if you're not up on the gospel and feeling comfortable in your walk with God, then you shouldn't start here. You should get comfortable with the basics. I know that, and I found this myself when getting into it. There are there's certain topics that are sort of the more exciting topics, and you're talking about Mystery Babylon and the fallen angels and all that type of stuff. All the that there's the enticing knowledge, let's say, and that's what I'm doing now, is sort of getting into that stuff. You need to have a basic. A fairly good basic understanding. You should have read the entire Bible, and you should sort of be not just a beginner in the Bible, because you get lost if you don't know the biblical story. Because the stuff that I've been looking into, like all these other religions and things, it goes all over the place, and it's easy if you don't know what to look for, and sort of if you don't know what the truth is, then you'll just get lost in all of the multitude of lies. So that's just the quick warning. I've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to go quickly, and this is probably going to be an hour-long video. If this ends up being 2 videos. Anyway, so yeah, but basics first. Basics first. You'll get more out of this stuff if you know the basics anyway. You'll just get lost if you try to come straight here. So there's warning. So can spirits be contacted? Like spirits of dead people, can they be contacted? Well, 1 Samuel 28. So now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had lamented him, and buried him in Ramah, even his own city. And Saul had put away those that had familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. And the Philistines gathered themselves together, and came and pitched in Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they pitched in Gilboa, because as we remember, Saul was the first king of Israel. And when Saul saw the host of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart greatly trembled. And when Saul inquired of the Lord answered him not, neither by dreams, nor by Urim, nor by the prophets. So dreams and prophets we understand, but Urim, I didn't know what that was. So looking it up on Webster's dictionary, Urim, the Urim and Thummim among the Israelites signify lights and perfections. These were a kind of ornament belonging to the habit of the high priest, in virtue of which he gave oracular answers to the people. But what they were has not been satisfactorily ascertained. So as far as lights and perfections, I looked it up, and the Urim and Thummim, meaning lights and perfections. There's a bunch of other possible interpretations of what that means. And I was going to go more into it, but I've got so much stuff to get into, I'm not going to go deeply into it. But so the kind of ornament belonging to the habit of the priest. So in Exodus 28 is a description of the high priest's garment, and I'll just read a bit out of there from 29 and 30. Well, it starts at about 15, and thou shalt make a breastplate of judgment with cunning work. After the work of the ephod, thou shalt make it of gold, of blue, and of purple, and of scarlet, and of fine twined linen, thou shalt make it. And verse 17, and thou shalt set it in settings of stones, even 4 rows of stones, and the first row shall be a sardius, a topaz, a carbuncle, etc. And it goes through the different stones. There's the 12 stones in the breastplate that goes on the high priest's garment. And verse 21, the stones shall be with the names of the children of Israel, 12 according to their names, like the engravings of a signet. Every one with his name shall it be according to the 12 tribes. So on this priestly garment, there was the 12 stones, each with a different tribe name on it. And 29, Aaron shall bear the names of the children of Israel in the breastplate of judgment upon his heart, when he goeth in unto the holy place, for a memorial before the Lord continually. And thou shalt put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Thummim, that they shall be upon Aaron's heart, when he goeth in before the Lord. And Aaron shall bear the judgment of the children of Israel upon his heart before the Lord continually. So, on this breastplate, there's the 12 stones of the different precious stones, and on these stones are written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So he's wearing them on his heart so that he remembers, he's always remembering the 12 tribes. And then there are also these things, the Urim and Thummim, which they had something to do with talking to God and gave oracular answers to the people. It had something to do with talking with God and getting answers from God. So it's on the high priest garment. So what it's saying here in verse 6 of Samuel 28, 1 Samuel 28, Saul inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him not, because Saul had been misbehaving by this point. So he didn't get any dreams, and the prophets didn't answer him. But the Urim, the high priest's garment, that whatever it was, that wasn't giving him answers either. So that's just what that was. So then going on, verse 7, Then Saul said unto his servants, Seek me a woman that hath a familiar spirit, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman that hath a familiar spirit at Endor. And Saul disguised himself and put on other raiment, and he went, and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, I pray thee, divine unto me by the familiar spirit, and bring me him up, whom I shall name unto thee. And the woman said unto him, Behold, thou knowest what Saul has done, how he hath cut off those that have familiar spirits, and the wizards out of the land. Wherefore then layest thou a snare for my life, to cause me to die? Now wherefore, why do you lay a snare for my life, to cause me to die? And Saul sware to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord liveth, there shall be no punishment happen to thee for this thing. Saul is doing the bad things. He gets rejected by God because he's been doing bad things, and he goes to cheat on God, basically. And anyway, that's what's happening. So then the woman said, Who shall I bring up to thee? And he said, Bring me up Samuel. And when the woman saw Samuel, and he was the judge of Israel, I guess the last judge of Israel, who's the one that crowned King David as well. And when the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice. And the woman spake to Saul, saying, Why hast thou deceived me? For thou art Saul. And the king said unto her, Be not afraid. For what sawest thou? And the woman said unto Saul, I saw gods ascending out of the earth. Interesting. I saw gods ascending out of the earth. It's bizarre. And he said unto her, What form is he of? And she said, An old man cometh up, and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed himself. And Samuel said to Saul, Why hast thou disquieted me to bring me up? And Saul answered, I am sore distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God is departed from me, and answereth me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called thee, that thou mayest make known unto me what I should do. Then said Samuel, Wherefore then dost thou ask of me, seeing the Lord is departed from me, and is become thine enemy? And the Lord hath done to him as he spake by me. For the Lord hath rent the kingdom out of thine hand, and given it to thy neighbour, even to David. Because thou obeyest not the voice of the Lord, nor executest his fierce wrath upon Amalek, therefore hath the Lord done this thing unto thee this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with thee into the land of the Philistines, and tomorrow shalt thou and thy sons be with me. The Lord shall also deliver the host of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. So, what happened there? So Saul went and inquired of this woman who was able to contact familiar spirits or spirits of the dead, and she actually did talk to Samuel. So it is possible. Seen in the Bible, it is possible to talk to dead spirits. So it's just interesting to note that in light of what we've been talking about with the gods, and the gods seeming to be passing down their deity status. It's almost as if there's a spirit in them, or sort of this idea of the resurrecting God. And we've talked about the phoenix and the sort of the dying and resurrecting God, and the cycle of life, the fertility gods. The god dies and the god gets resurrected. So it's almost as if there's a spirit that comes back from the dead and passes down from king to king. Because we've seen the attributes of the gods, the so-called gods, these pagan gods. They seem to be similar, and so it's just an interesting thing to note that there is something going on with spirits and spirits of the dead. It does seem to be possible to bring back the spirits of the dead, and there wasn't a bit there about possession. But we do know from other things I've read and other places in the Bible, it's possible for spirits, or devils you might call them, to possess people. And we also know that God's put his spirit in us. So it's interesting things to note. So Apollo, now we know Apollo for Apollyon in verse 11 of chapter 9 of Revelation. We read that before as the angel of the bottomless pit. So we're going to read about Apollo. Apollo is one of the most important and complex of the Olympian deities in classical Greek and Roman religion and Greek and Roman mythology. The national divinity of the Greeks, Apollo has been recognized as a god of archery, music and dance, truth and prophecy, healing and diseases, the sun and the light, poetry and more. So just a few things to notice. We've seen a couple of things where, that picture of Asher with the bow, and we've seen Nimrod was a hunter and Esau was a hunter, and it seems to be the case that seems to be an association with the enemy of God and hunters as opposed to shepherds. So there's that, the god of archery. Music seems to be a thing with Satan. I'll make a bit of a note about that later. The truth and prophecy, we'll get to that soon. Healing and diseases. Sun, it says that he's a sun god. He's associated with light as well, and poetry and more. Apollo is the son of Zeus. Interesting. So we've got, just make note of that at this point, the son of Zeus, and it's been noted elsewhere that Zeus is Satan, but anyway. But I'd say Apollo was also Satan, but you could say, anyway, we'll leave that there for the moment. Apollo is the son of Zeus and Leto, and has a twin sister, the chaste huntress Artemis. Seen as the most beautiful god and the ideal of the Kuros, a beardless athletic youth, Apollo is considered to be the most Greek of all gods. I'm skipping down a bit. As the patron of Delphi, we'll get to Delphi, Apollo is an oracular god, the prophetic deity of the Delphic oracle. So an oracular god. So what is an oracle? Well, looking in the Webster's dictionary, among pagans, the answer of a god or some person reputed to be a god, or among pagans, the answer of a god or some person reputed to be a god, to an inquiry made respecting some affair of importance, usually respecting some future event as its success for an enterprise or battle, the deity who gave or was supposed to give answers to inquiries as the Delphic oracle, the place where answers are given. Among Christians, oracles in the plural denotes the communications, revelations, or messages delivered by God to prophets. In this sense, it is rarely used in the singular, but we say the oracles of God, divine oracles, meaning the scriptures. So I've got this god, Apollo, most Greek of all the gods. And as we've seen in the past, some of these pagan gods, they have some attributes of the true God, the Father, Jehovah. So I guess that's in this sense. We've got Apollo also taking on that, God of sun and light, and we're going to get to that very soon. So we got sun god. Apollo is associated with the sun. He's an oracular god. He's a bringer of truth, or a bringer of light. You might say that. So what about Lucifer? It sounds a little bit like Lucifer. We'll go into the Lucifer bit in Wikipedia. It's a Latin name for the planet Venus, as the morning star in the ancient Roman era, and is often used for mythological and religious figures associated with the planet. It's interesting, we've seen gods personified as Jupiter and Saturn as well, and gods representing other things in nature. And we've seen all these gods they seem to have in some sense different forms, but in some sense the same form, different attributes, but then all sort of seems to come back to the same attribute. It seems to be all these pagan gods all sort of seem to be the same type of thing. And we've also seen that these pagan gods just for the most, they're just people personified as gods. So Romans 1, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So basically that's what Paul's saying there. There's all these pagan religions, and they're They worship, essentially, as I understand it, all these different gods is all Satan. It's all the Antichrist spirit, you might say. It's the replacement of Christ, is what Antichrist means, in place of Christ. And so all these different gods, they're all, it's worshipping the creature rather than the creator. It's worshipping Venus, it's worshipping Jupiter, it's worshipping Saturn, or it's a fertility god of some sort, and all these different things, but it's at the end of the day, it's all the same God in different forms, and at the end, and they're all just people, but they're people, I would say, that have the spirit in them. So then going back to Apollo and down to the bottom, in Greco-Roman civilization, the morning star was often personified and considered a god. In some versions, considered the son of Aurora, or the son of the dawn. So we know in Isaiah 14, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" So, son of the dawn, son of the morning. Is that similarity there? In 2 Corinthians, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." There's association with the sun there, and the bringer of light, and the morning star, and Satan. Apollo is associated with the sun and with light. He's an oracular god. Light is associated with knowledge, so Satan associated with the bringer of knowledge. Go back to Genesis 3, and he's talking about basically about the knowledge of good and evil, and he's the bringer of knowledge. But it's obviously he's the father of lies as well. We've talked about that. So the bringer of knowledge, that would be a lie. Well, it's semi a lie. You could say it's knowledge, depending on how you define knowledge. It's information. He's bringing information. It's not true knowledge. It's not the truth. And I just thought I'd make a quick note on the burden of the Lord, because we talked about oracles and bringing knowledge, but there's also, you'll see in some places, like I'll put a few on the screen there, in Nahum and Habakkuk and Malachi, I've got the burden of the Lord, the burden of Nineveh, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see, the burden of the word of the Lord to Israel by Malachi. And it seems to be, like these are prophecies we're talking about. So there's the oracles, but there's the burden of the Lord. And it does, you can imagine it being a burden for God to give you bad news to give to somebody, or prophecy, the burden of the Lord. I've got a bit here to read from Jeremiah 23 just on that point. It's a little bit of a sidetrack, but "Behold, I am against the prophets, saith the Lord, that use their tongues and say, He saith. Behold, I am against them that prophesy false dreams, saith the Lord, and do tell them, and cause my people to err by their lies and by their lightness. Yet I sent them not, nor commanded them. Therefore they shall not profit this people at all, saith the Lord. And when this people, or the prophet, or a priest, shall ask thee, saying, What is the burden of the Lord? Thou shalt say unto them, What burden?" So it's kind of the oracle here. They're seeking answers here, but it's called in this sense a burden. So just make that association. "I will even forsake you, saith the Lord. And as for the prophet and the priest and the people that shall say, The burden of the Lord, I will even punish that man and his house. Thus shall ye say, every one to his neighbour, and every one to his brother, What hath the Lord answered, and what hath the Lord spoken? And the burden of the Lord shall ye mention no more, for every man's word shall be his burden. For ye have perverted the words of the living God, and the Lord of hosts, our God." So, back to Apollo. Now, his other attributes we're going through now. So medicine and healing associated with Apollo. So it's you're taking on the attribute of actual God. When Jesus came, he actually healed people. And there was a bit, I don't think I've got it here, but there's a thing where, I can't remember what it's called, but it'll be on the screen, I guess. Can I look? Yeah, I just have notes here, I don't have it on the screen, but there's this idea that the God, in the pagan religions, that the gods can bring the harm, and then they can cure the harm. So I would suggest that when it talks about medicine and healing, you could say that's what Satan does. He brings harm and then offers the cure. That's sort of how the world works, right? I mean, I won't get too sidetracked here, but there's plenty of people who think that certain diseases have been brought by the establishment, the deep state, the cabal, the Illuminati, or whatever you want to call the bad people behind the world. Ultimately, it being Satan, but you bring the ailment and then you offer the cure. So that could be where it's coming from here. Apollo is also the god who could bring ill health and deadly plague with his arrows. Apollo is the god of archery and the invention of archery. And we've also got that bit where Satan, the fiery darts of the devil. And that's why, in Ephesians 6, put on the full armor of God. The shield of faith, I think, so it can protect against the fiery darts of the devil. So it's interesting to note that connection as well. Apollo is the god of archery, and the invention of archery is credited to him and his sister Artemis. Interesting. And he has a golden and a silver bow and a quiver of golden arrows. As the god of music, art of muses, Apollo presided over all music, songs, dance, and poetry. And there is I can't remember where, is it in the Bible? Yeah, there is a bit in the Bible. I'll get it now, where Satan is, at least in some sense, associated with music. Because we've got, in the creation, when the sons of God all sung together. And it's easy to get sidetracked. Let's just keep going. He is the inventor of string music and the frequent companion of the muses, functioning as their chorus leader in celebrations. The lyre is a common attribute of Apollo. So in Ezekiel 28, we have the bit talking about, sounds like it's talking about Satan. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes, musical instruments, was prepared in the day that thou wast created. And skipping down a bit, thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. I'm talking about he's beautiful, Satan's beautiful. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings that they may behold thee. Thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore I will bring forth a fire from the midst of thee, and it shall devour thee. And I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. And they that know thee among the people shall be astonished at thee, and thou shalt be a terror, and never shalt thou be any more. So I thought that was interesting, that also the fire from the midst of thee, because we know that there's the lake of fire, being thrown in the lake of fire. I don't know if there's that association, but I have made the association before where people who take the mark of the beast, they're going to be permanently binding their soul to Satan, and so they're going to go where he goes, and if he's going to the lake of fire, and I don't know if that fire that's coming from the midst of him, I don't know if that is the lake of fire. I don't know, but it's just an interesting thing to note that Satan is going to, for fire, come from the midst of him, and he's going to be in the lake of fire. So I don't know if there's a connection there or not. So back to Apollo. As a protector of the young, Apollo is concerned with the health and education of children. He presides over their passage into adulthood, which I find a bit sick, considering what we know about QAnon and all the pedophilia and stuff. Apollo is an important pastoral deity. He is the patron of herdsmen and shepherds. Protector of the flocks and herds and crops from diseases and pests were his primary duties. So once again, taking on the attributes of God. Apollo encouraged founding new towns. It's an interesting point. I want to make another point later on, I guess, about this. Apollo encouraged the founding new towns and establishment of civil construction, and is associated with dominion over colonists. He's also the giver of laws, and his oracles were consulted before setting the laws in a city. So of course, there's a thing which I haven't got into yet with Cain, and was Cain the seed of Satan? There's implications in Genesis chapter 4 that that's the case. And after Cain kills Abel, he goes forth and he has Enoch, not the Enoch of who walked with God, but he had a son called Enoch, and he founded the first city called Enoch. So Enoch was the first city. And so it's just interesting that Apollo is the establisher of towns and cities, and as we have seen throughout the Bible, and especially in Ezekiel, there's association between cities and spirits that seem to be in cities. The kings of certain cities, and they tend to be bad kings, like the king of Tyre, and the king in Ezekiel, I think it was the king of Babylon, and there's the prince of Persia in Daniel as well. And so there's all these associations with spirits and cities and iniquity and bad things going on in cities. And of course, Sodom and Gomorrah and stuff like that. So keep going down. Apollo is the god who affords help and wards off evil. La-ha. He's delivered men from academics, averter of evil, patron of seafarers. In Hellenistic times, especially during the 5th century BCE, once again, don't be strict on the dates. They might be accurate. And when we're talking about ancient Greece, they're more likely to be accurate than we're talking about the Sumerian things, because the history seems to be more legitimate, but nevertheless, don't take the dates too strictly. As Apollo Helios, he became identified among the Greeks with Helios, Titan, god of the sun. So another sun right there, Helios. In Latin texts, however, there was no conflation with Apollo with Sol among the classical Latin poets until 1st century. So, just a bit on Helios quickly. As a description, Helios is seen as both the personification of the sun and the fundamental creative power behind it, and as a result, it is often worshipped as the god of life and creation. Just like the false light. Homer, the creation rather than the creator. Homer described Helios as a god who gives joy to mortals. Interesting, because you could say in a sense that's what Satan does, because you could say he's the god of death. I mean, as he's very big into the music and the celebrations and sexual promiscuity and all the lusts of the flesh, but of people who are going to die, because of course he takes people to death. Another ancient text gives him the epithet gracious, given that he's the source of life and regeneration. And regeneration in the sense that you die and then you're reborn. Reincarnation, I guess that's one of the things that all these paganistic, or you might say satanic religions do, is it's about dying and rebirth. So as opposed to the true God, who's offering through Jesus Christ, through people who believe in him, eternal life, the version of eternal life that Satan is offering is you die and then your spirit is reborn. But really what that means, as I understand it, is that Satan gives you his spirit and he lives through you. And then when you die, he gives his spirit to somebody else. So it's not really you living forever. It's you continuing on the satanic tradition. Anyway, associated with the creation of the world. One passage recorded in Greek magic papyri says of Helios, the earth flourished when you shone forth and made the plants fruitful when you laughed and brought life to living creatures where you permitted. Anyway, so you can see why Satan would want to associate Jesus with the sun. Jesus, of course, being the Son of God, but by doing that, if Satan can convince people to associate Jesus with the sun and say, hey, Jesus is just another one of these sun deities, then people who believe in that and who worship Jesus under those terms will be worshipping Satan, basically. Back to Apollo. Etymology, and going down a bit, several instances of popular etymology are attested from ancient authors. Thus, Greeks most often associate Apollo's name with the Greek verb to destroy. And skipping down, a number of non-Greek etymologies have been suggested for the name. The Hittite Apollonus is attested related to Hurrian, Etruscan, Alpu, a god of plague, and in turn from Akkadian, Alpu Enlil, meaning the son of Enlil, who we talked about in a previous video. I think it was 2 videos ago, I think. A title was given to the god Nergal, who was linked to Shamash, Babylonian god of the sun. So Shamash, otherwise called Utu, another god that we talked about. I'm pretty sure it was 2 videos ago we talked about this. So there's association going back to Sumerian gods here. Sumerian and Babylonian. And at the bottom, Aluian etymology suggested for Apollonus makes Apollo the one of entrapment, or perhaps in the sense of hunter. So they've got another hunter association there. And Satan roams around like a sort of roaring lion, seeking those who he may devour. There's another reference there. Greco-Roman epithets. Apollo's chief epithet was Phoebus, literally bright, but was very commonly used by both Greeks and Romans for Apollo's role as the god of light. And then there are some other epithets there related to the sun. Son of light of the sun, literally sun, light. Another lito. Giving or bringing light, bright, all these things. You can look at the epithets there if you want to read. Going down to origins. For the Greeks, Apollo was all the gods in one, and through the centuries he acquired different functions which could originate from different gods. So we've talked about syncretism before, and all the gods basically, sort of what I've been saying, that the gods all have the same attributes because they all come from the same place. It's all Satan. It's all Satan worship. All of these pagan gods, as I understand it, it's all the worship of Satan. And it was Satan personified in human form, you might say. So Satan he'll live through He'll live through people if you want him to. If you sell your soul to Satan, you might say, he can live through you. It's all Satan. So, yeah, so it might be said that every so often the entire world will worship the same pagan god, and so the civilizations that have, I guess in the Bible would be, in Daniel we've seen as the Babylonian, and then the Medo-Persian Empire, and then the Greek, and then the Roman, and perhaps before then you could say it was the Sumerian. The Egyptian one is weird. I think I want to look into that in the future and go into a bit more the Egyptian. I want to sort of go into the major things in the Bible, the things that are represented in the Bible. So of course we've got the Babylonian, the Egyptian, and the Apollo is mentioned in there. So there's the Greek and the Sumerian and the prehistory, antediluvian stuff. We've got all these things. So that's sort of what I'm doing in this series, is sort of going through and trying to understand what's coming. That's what I'm trying to do. But it seems to be the case, every so often, like is the case with Apollo, and we're going to get to Alexander the Great. Every so often there's a god that gets worshipped, becomes all the gods and is worshipped. When the empire of this particular god or a particular period expands out, I'll have this god worshipped in the entire world. And I think that's what's happening again in the end times. I assume that's what's happening, and that's what the Antichrist will be. Because I've showed in the past the links between these gods and things and Donald Trump, the Freemasons and Donald Trump, and sort of he seems to be connected with sort of the line of kings. You've seen how the family of kings, the role of the creator God, the spirit inside the kings gets passed down from generation to generation. So Donald Trump is the most recent ruler of the world, you might say, would be the most recent incarnation. So yeah, every so often there'll be one king who rules widely, and that'll be. It's interesting to note that we've seen that before. So I'm getting close to 33 minutes. I'm going to start the pause here. I'll be back in a second.